So welcome back. It's an honor for me to introduce Joschka Fischer, the former Vice Chancellor and Foreign Minister of Germany, to you. Of course, everybody knows you, Mr. Fischer. We're talking about geopolitics now, an interesting topic, extremely high on the agenda of everybody's mind. So where do we stand when we look at the global landscape currently?
Well, I think February 24th last year has changed from a European perspective almost everything, but I think also from a global perspective. The retreat of the US from Afghanistan, a disastrous retreat, gave the impression, and I think this guided Vladimir Putin into his wrong decision to attack Ukraine, that the US is in a decline. But I think on the reaction of the Ukraine aggression, war of aggression by Russia, Biden did a terrific job. So on a global level, the US is in a certain way back. And from a European perspective, thank God that they are back, because what would Europe by itself do with its military capabilities, which are not very impressive, without the US? I think we would be in a much more dangerous situation from a European perspective. And nevertheless, I mean, you can see it here in Germany. The so-called Zeitenwende, it's not a fake, it's real. On February the 24th last year, this was the end of the post-Second World War period for Germany, because we now have to readjust almost everything. Our relationship with Russia is gone, and there will be no turning back for a long period. Our energy supply relation is gone. I think for the EU as a whole, the center of gravity moved to the east. The new member states, Poland and other new member states in the EU, are now really members. The decision of Sweden and Finland to apply for NATO membership, if you would have asked me 1 year before whether this would happen, I would say, dream on. It will never happen. But February 24th, the aggression of Russia towards Ukraine has changed everything. And now we will see that almost all EU member states will be also NATO member states. I think this offers new opportunities, and especially for Turkey, for the promise that Ukraine is a candidate together with Georgia, together with Moldova. I think shows that the EU is turning away from the center of the common market. The common market will continue to be important, but the future of the EU will be security. Why is that so? Because we will have, whether we like it or not, we will have a threat. The threat is named Russia, and this threat will continue. Even if Putin, what I really hope, will lose that war, the threat will continue to be there, and Europe has to be prepared for to deter this threat. So the whole landscape, the geopolitical landscape, has changed. And then we see the top level on the global sphere, it's China and America. This will be the defining axis of the 21st century.
Let me ask you about what your take is on actually the visit of Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, to Russia, also when it comes to the body language of both leaders, because clearly that was, if you looked at the picture, it looked like the Chinese president is clearly the driving force in that relation. So what's your assessment?
Well, China tries to use this opportunity. They see it as an opportunity. I'm not so impressed by the diplomacy by Xi Jinping because I think he has missed a great opportunity 1 year ago when the war came to Ukraine to have a more flexible, a more independent position as an in-between, because this would have offered him the opportunity to improve the relationship with the US, which China is still heavily depending on. But the decision is made in Beijing that Putin offers a great opportunity. China can exploit the mess Putin has maneuvered himself into. And they try to exploit it.
If you say, well, the future of Europe is security because of the Russian threat, is it also that we are going to see more of a bloc building like China and Russia versus the rest? Is that something you think will happen?
I think this will not work. I mean, globalization as we know it in the past is gone. But this does not mean that globalization is gone. There will be in the 21st century a growing interdependency between the major global powers. If you look to the relationship between China and America, China is still heavily dependent on the American market, and same with Europe and vice versa. So it will be more complicated. It won't be as easy as it used to be in the past, but it's not the end. And I don't see a bloc means China and Russia. I don't believe that it will be strong enough. On the other side, the realignment of the building of alliances in East Asia and also in Europe is moving on very fast and very successful. But it will be a complicated world. It will be a world where we will have trade not only within democracies or authoritarian regimes. We will have trade, but what we don't will have is a naivety that we do not take serious the geopolitical second thoughts of regimes. And especially for Europe, or very especially for Germany, never again this over-dependency from an authoritarian regime like it happened in the energy dependency of Germany to Russia.
So, but for the economy or for businesses, that would also mean that perhaps the cheapest alternative is no longer available because geopolitical interests are also very important?
Yeah, well, they will be dominant.
Yes.
I mean, economic interests are very important, but there will be a change. It has happened and will continue to happen, that especially in Germany, the business community is not used, that there is a contradiction between geopolitical and security goals and external economic goals. In the future, I think you will see that there might be a difference. And This will also change the behavior of big companies and will influence the risk calculation. Yeah, the question will be whether the Europeans will wake up and create a new dynamic which will be strong enough to move according to our security interests.
Do you think there will be, or there's enough deep understanding on the European level that this needs to be done, or what's your assessment of the situation in Brussels?
Well, the center of gravity moved from the west to the east inside the European Union. Eastern Europeans are stronger because they were on the right side of history. And this will transform the European Union, the European project. It will be a geopolitical project. I think full membership as the ultimate goal of accession to the EU. This will not matter for the future of the European Union. The geopolitical security issue will be much more important. And this will be in close combination, this will happen in close combination with NATO. So it's a very different landscape what we will see in Europe. And also, I think expenditures, investments in security will dramatically increase.
So we're just at the beginning, in your view, of like this military investment super cycle?
Yeah. I don't like it, but it's a question of reality.
In the beginning, when the US administration came into the office, one had the feeling that they wanted to make Europe made their mind up to be closer to them than to China. So where do we stand in Europe, and how can we actually make sure that we perhaps even be on one level playing field with these superpowers?
Well, the 21st century will be defined by two superpowers, the US and China, and their relationship will define the century. That's my view, to put it in a nutshell. And Europe, we are not a superpower, and we will be a superpower. But what we should achieve is not to be we should avoid to be disconnected. In cycling sports, you would say, I don't know the English word, so I say it in German, am Hinterrad bleiben of the two superpowers, at the wheel of the two superpowers. Yeah. And this is quite a challenge. We have to do a lot. If you look to technology, in digital technology, the Europeans, especially in the business, digital business, we are de facto not in a strong position. Our scientists, our universities are doing an excellent job. And not only in the old European Union, but also in our neighbors in the eastern member states and in non-EU member states. I think we have the potential, but what we need is the will, the political will to move in that direction.
But with all these crises, one has the feeling that, especially in Europe, in the United States perhaps also a little bit, the state is kind of back. And the state, by its nature itself, at least many people do say that, it's less dynamic for the economy, or less dynamism for the economy. So what's your view? Why do we, especially in Europe, like the state so much as an economic actor?
Well, that's a historical, cultural question, because we are as we are. I have no other answer. Our American relatives, later American relatives, our American cousins, mostly came from Europe, and they crossed the huge Atlantic Ocean. They were risk takers. And we are the descendants from those Europeans who stayed at home. We are more risk averse.
Yes.
And this will not change, by the way. We have to manage that. We have to live with it. And we have to try to make the move forward. Look, we had this silly or stupid debate about Eurosceptics. Let's go back to the European national state. Now, after Putin's attack, tell me one European nation state, one, who is able to defeat itself, who is able to manage the whole crisis. None. There is none. So the European Union, and size matters in the 21st century. The European Union, if it wouldn't exist, it had to be invented. And there is no Eurosceptic debate nowadays, because it's obvious that without sticking together, we have no future in the 21st century. And look now to the consequences of the Swiss bank crisis. It goes deeper than a crisis of the financial market. It's directly hurting the self-perception of Switzerland. And we know nowadays that we have to stick together, we have to come together as Europeans. Or look to our British friends. It's almost impossible to understand the rationality of what they did. It's completely against the reality. So I think
perhaps if one may say so, one positive aspect from that very dire situation we're in is that Europe might get its act together and really grow together faster and push projects. We have been discussing that yesterday as well, these capital market unions. I think since I left university, which is not yesterday, obviously, we're discussing the deepening of the capital market unions, and nothing is in a way happening. So do you think Europeans kind of wake up and speed up their political will?
Usually it's done by a disastrous event.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah? I mean, why did the EU emerge? Why was it founded, and why did it move on? It was the consequences of the first half of the 20th century, 2 world wars, which led to the EU. So usually you would say, if the disaster is big enough, then we will move. But this is also, it's a very dire perspective.
Yes, indeed. That brings me in a way back to the war in the Ukraine and the perspective of, I think 2 or 3 months into the war, first commentators were saying, in a year's time, we are used to this war. As sad as it sounds, and now we're there a year on, and it seems that this war is like ongoing and ongoing, and nobody knows how it might actually end in a way. What do you think? What could be the the scenario how to end that conflict?
I think the major goal must be that Putin cannot be allowed to win, because if Putin has the impression that he has won, This would lead to another round.
Yes.
This would not mean we are now at the end of the war. This would then lead to an acceleration and a continuation of this aggression, and this would be a very dangerous outcome.
I mean, we're already seeing first, like, at least upheavals in Georgia and Moldavia. They are concerned that they could be also affected by an invasion. Do you think that's realistic to open up different fronts?
Yeah, but it would be a mistake only to look of the former Soviet republics.
Okay.
Because, or maybe a combination. What is Putin dreaming about? Putin is dreaming about of a restoration of the glory of Russia. He is not interested in the Soviet Union. He is more interested in a restoration as it happened in Russia at the end of the 19th century. So for Putin, Russia can only survive or held together if it's a global power, if it has the prestige of a global power. If not, then he sees a threat of Russia. But to be a global power, he needs Ukraine. And nobody knows what will be if he defines himself as a victor, what will be his next imagination. The only thing we can learn out of history is that the stepping stone from a regional power to a global power was the Russian hegemony in Eastern Europe. And if this will happen, a restoration of the hegemony in Eastern Europe, then we are in an endless mess. We must avoid such a development. And this means Russia cannot be allowed to be a winner on the battlefield in Ukraine. By the way, this would have also a very negative impact on China with Taiwan, because they are studying very carefully what's going on. So this would lead to a troublesome world, and for Europe it would be a disaster.
Yeah, but but I still have the question of how can this war be terminated, because it seems that it's kind of stuck. And Russia still has, I mean, there are always reports that the military is done and they can't do anything anymore, but they have still loads of ammunition. They have a huge military industry to push more into the country. So is our response solely the response to send also more military equipment into the country?
Yes. Clear. Yes. And we have the responsibility to do everything to deter and to preserve our own security. Don't forget this aspect. It's also very important. But yes.
Would you, because there are also these concerns are coming up here and then as well, that if Putin would be pushed or more into the corner, that he could go into using nuclear?
Oh, I don't see that. I don't see that. They are threatening with the use of nuclear weapons, but for example, China has no interest in the use of nuclear weapons in the Ukraine war, because this would completely change the reality on the global level. And this would disrupt the Chinese strategy of peaceful growth. I don't see that. But
sorry.
It's for Europe, huh? We'll have to face also this reality. It's now a too complicated discussion for the event here, but it shall be mentioned that in the future we will have also the debate about European nuclear deterrence. That's a consequence out of these terrible events.
Yes, if you're looking into this military super cycle, but I'd like to bring you back to the point that China is looking very carefully or like very closely to what happens in the Ukraine because of Taiwan. I sometimes have the feeling that the US is already preparing that narrative that China, after a certain time, could actually invade Taiwan anyways because they want to do it. Is that something you think is credible?
I don't see the rationale for that. If you look to especially technology of the future, computer chips, the biggest companies and the most advanced, technologically advanced companies on this globe are in East Asia. Number one, TSCM of Taiwan. Number two, Samsung in South Korea. So and the biggest market for the Taiwanese chip industry is China. So why to destroy that? Makes no sense for me. I don't believe in this theory that they will attack anyway. There will be changes, but in my view, they can be also achieved in a peaceful way. We shouldn't underestimate, we're not talking only about China, we are talking about East Asia. This shouldn't be forgotten. It's South Korea, Taiwan, Japan, Singapore. So there is a shift, a technological driven shift to these East Asian economic zone.
So our dependence on East Asia is growing in the future. I mean, especially looking at chip manufacturers.
Yeah, definitely. But this is a process going on since long. This shifting the center of gravity from west to east, from the Atlantic sphere into the East Asian Pacific region. This is not happening nowadays only. And we will have a living diplomacy and trade with this region and trying to avoid hard confrontation.
Unfortunately, we are almost approaching our 30 minutes, but I would like to give you the opportunity at the end of our discussion or interview to look ahead into the future. Perhaps where do we think we stand as the world economy, also in geopolitical, but also economic aspects at the end of this decade? Because it seems that so much has changed. So where do you see the big developments going forward?
Well, we haven't talked about the biggest change.
Yes, indeed.
The biggest change is we were talking about a lot of the terrible consequences of a war of aggression on our continent, in Ukraine. We have talked about the rivalry between the US and China. But the biggest change is happening on a global level, climate change.
Yes.
The consequences will hit everybody around the globe. And also other global challenges. I think this will be the most dramatic change and transform all our economic institutions, our way to behave, our way of living. This will have dramatic consequences. And even in the pure economic sector. Do you seriously believe that at the midst of the century, we will still rely on technologies of today? I don't believe that. So if you want to be competitive, you have to transform yourself. You have to be innovative. We will have 9 billion people. Now the UN conference about water shortages is putting the finger on one of the big challenges. We will see the rise of sea levels. We will see a lot of changes. We will see migration based on these events. And there is no way to say, yeah, it's my neighbor has to deal with it, but not me. It's a global challenge. And it's the first time that humanity will face such global challenges. And this is the real change for me.
So if you look at climate change, that also means, though, that countries like India and China, we have to find a different way for them to actually change their way, how to grow in terms of economic growth.
Yeah, it will be a very, very bitter debate.
Yes.
They will tell us, look, you are, for 200 years or even 300 years, you had the benefits of industrialization, and you are those who are responsible for the unintended negative consequences. And you are now trying to tell us that we are not allowed to develop because of the mess you created. So please give us compensation that we can also develop. And the same message will come from the global south, from Africa in the 21st century. It will be a very complicated debate, but you don't have to be a genius to imagine that this debate will come.
Are you in the camp of optimists that humanity will manage to use technology advances and like really change the way how to run an economy in order to preserve the climate, the world, or not?
Yes. Personally, I'm not an optimist about my own future. I will be 75 in few days, and that's an age where you start to be a pessimist from a personal point of view. But from a global point of view, yes, I think it will be extremely hard. It will be extremely challenging. But at the end, human beings are under pressure always innovative. I believe in that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fischer. I think we leave it here on this optimist note. Thanks very much for being here, for talking us through all these topics. I mean, we have covered a lot of ground, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.